Good, very cold morning, and welcome to Coffee and Football presented by John Donovan and Longhorn Wealth Management Group. I'm your host, Blake Monroe, where I'm joined each and every morning by CJ Vogel and Bobby Burton. And guys, a lot went down this weekend, a lot of news. It was just like bam, 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 kind of like the end of last week. And it started with Bond, Isaiah Bond. And let's talk about that for a minute, as he's now the Longhorns' newest commit.
What an addition. I mean, you talk about speed and ability to take the top off of a defense. It's exactly what Isaiah Bond brings to the table, and versatility as well. He had, 58% of his snaps were from the slot at Alabama this past season. So it opens up the door for Texas to move in a lot of wide receivers in and out of that offense. We talked about Isaiah Bond, Jonte Cook, Matthew Golden. That's a wide receiver group right now, not to mention Ryan Wingo and the freshman group as well, who can come in and be very versatile. You can move them all around, disguise a lot of tendencies and looks with Steve Sarkisian's offense. It's a tremendous addition. I believe he's the number one wide receiver in the portal this offseason. I think the number 2 overall player by On3 as well. So quite the addition, and someone that he said – he's looking forward to playing with a very high draft pick in Quinn Ewers, and he's looking forward to being a high draft pick as well. So though he does have multiple years of eligibility left, this is looking like it's going to be a one-and-done situation. Another wide receiver from Texas entering the NFL after 2024, something that probably was maybe a question mark if Texas was going to continue to produce the NFL caliber guys year in and year out. Bond is looking like he will continue the trend set by Xavier Worthy, Jordan Whittington, and A.D. Mitchell from 2023. So a huge addition, another toy for Steve Sarkisian, and a big-time addition to the offense and a target for Quinn Ewers.
I just love what you said about the versatility. We've talked about Adonai Mitchell and Jordan Whittington kind of had definitive positions within Steve Sarkisian's offense. A guy like Isaiah Bond, guy like Matthew Golden, even a guy like Jonte Cook are kind of positionless. You can move them around. They're not predestined to be on the outside or only a speed demon like Word. I mean, they have some flexibility to them, so you're not going to necessarily know where they're coming from. And my first thing, Blake, when you said things are going down in Austin, I thought you were talking about the thermometer. It is. I mean, look, these people. It is cold, like cold upon cold right now. I've seen some. I think the lowest I've seen so far is 7 degrees. Is that right? Holy cow! Stay warm. Make sure ERCOT doesn't mess you up. I'll put it that way today. But it certainly was hot on the 40 acres in Steve Sarkisian's office. Not only him, but Silas Bolden, the wide receiver out of Oregon State, visited Texas as well. He's told multiple outlets now that he's also leaning to Texas. Now, interestingly, he's also scheduled to visit USC, Washington, and Arizona. Well, Washington and Arizona is now up in the air because the Arizona head coach on Sunday took the Washington head job. So they could just try to get him to go to Washington instead of Arizona, et cetera. So we'll have to wait and see what that exactly means. But Silas Bolden, definitely impressed by his time in Austin. He is not a midterm graduate or midterm enrollee like Isaiah Bond. Instead, he's a summer grad of Oregon State, and then will be a grad transfer at that time wherever he goes. Kendrick Blackshire, the linebacker out of Alabama, also was in over the weekend. Not sure yet whether or not Texas is pushing for that commitment at this point. So we'll have to wait and see. Some other portal news that I think is huge. Amari Niblack, the tight end out of Alabama, went into the portal yesterday afternoon. Texas would certainly have interest in him. He's kind of the quintessential prototype for Steve Sarkisian, 6'4", 235, can run like a deer, had that big, long touchdown reception against Texas. So people are familiar with him. Then there's also Ben Urisic, the tight end out of Stanford that visited Georgia over the weekend. Texas and Georgia expected to be the finalists for him. He does not graduate, though, from Stanford until March, so he would not be able to be on campus until June.
All right, guys, we had some other big news that went down this weekend, and something that, had kind of been happening behind the scenes for a little bit now, but it was made public over the weekend, and that's that Coach Akina has returned to Texas from Arizona. So, Bobby, I'm going to let you start on this one. Tell us a little bit about the role that he'll be filling.
Yeah, so we don't know the exact role at this point. We just know it's going to be an off-the-field assistant as an analyst. You see his timeline there. Spent 13 years at Texas, developed 6 first-round draft picks, I think 14 draft picks in all over those 13 years. Just a tremendous coach. Had a guy named Chris McAllister at Arizona, by the way. That was a tremendous player. Played quarterback at Washington, backed up Warren Moon. Believe it or not, back in the day at University of Washington, but really got started in the coaching business with a guy named Dick Tomey at the University of Hawaii. Dwayne's a native; he's an Islander, and Dick Tomey was the head coach at Hawaii. Then went to Arizona. Dwayne followed him there. He has only been at 4 different really big places in the last 40 years of his coaching career. I mean, think about how rare that is in these day and age where you look at coaches that are almost nomads. He spent 8 years at Stanford with David Shaw after leaving Texas. Then back at Arizona last year as an off-the-field analyst. Dwayne's now 67 years old. He coached Blake Gideon back in the day. So he's going to be a good fit for this coaching staff. He is a coach's coach and a player's coach at the same time. That is a rare feat. Rod Babers talked about it last night on our live stream. He's a guy that just gets along with everybody, has a positive attitude in the building each and every day. Blake, I got to tell you, I think this is a big deal for Texas from a culture standpoint. I think that it's somebody that Steve Sarkisian keeps adding pieces to the puzzle. He and Coach Akina and Coach Nansen got to be close while at Arizona, by the way. So there's a lot of ties there that I think are really interesting and incredible.
Bobby, you're talking about Arizona coaches, and of course, Texas hired linebackers coach, from Arizona in Nansen. But now Arizona is coachless, I guess you could say. And a lot of the players now are clamoring for him to be the next head coach of Arizona. What are y'all's thoughts on this?
Well, I think it's normal. This is what happens at just about every opportunity, right? CJ and Blake, the players want somebody that they're familiar with. A lot of them are a lot. There's Richard Jefferson. A lot of them are defensive players. Jacob Manu, the linebacker. You don't see many offensive players saying that right now. So that's one thing to watch for. The offensive players are really what picked that team up, I thought, this year. Noah Fafita, the quarterback, Territory McMillan, the wide receiver. Those kind of guys are, the guys that really drove that. Doesn't mean that Nansen didn't have a big role and that they couldn't get better. But long story short, I think that's going to be interesting to see which way the University of Arizona admin decides to go. I have no insight right now whether or not he's a real candidate or just one being foisted on by the current players.
All right. Well, before we move on here, Bobby, I'm going to go ahead and let you tell everybody about John Donovan and Longhorn Wealth Management Group.
Yeah, John is a Longhorn through and through. I'll just put it that way. He is a proud UT grad and shares his Longhorn passion with his wife and 6 siblings, all of whom are also UT grads. John's a certified financial planner, has spent more than 30 years providing investment, insurance, retirement, and estate planning services and solutions to his clients. John has served 14 years as a Dallas, Texas Exes board member, and it's his love for UT that has inspired him to dedicate his firm to serving his fellow UT alums and all UT employees. For a free 90-minute consultation to explore how Longhorn Wealth can serve you and your loved ones, please give John Donovan and his team a call at 972-707-4900 or visit longhornwealth.net. I think he might even throw in a cup of hot chocolate if you call him today. It is really cold outside. I can see the weather coming down. But, John Donovan, 972-707-4900 or visit longhornwealth.net.
Okay, guys, 2 or 3 things we haven't talked about yet that are hot commodities right now in the chat. Let's start with tight end recruiting, specifically tight end portal recruiting. What's the latest?
Well, I mentioned Amari Niblack out of Alabama. I think he's a a possibility. We're going to wait and see exactly what he has. I'm trying to find out whether or not Niblack has the same representation as Isaiah Bond. That could be a key tell. I do not know that to be the case as of this morning. Then also, I mentioned Ben Urisic, the tight end out of Stanford that visited Georgia over the weekend. He will not make a decision right away. We don't believe he's going to try to visit Texas. He does not graduate until March, so he's not a mid-year guy either. Niblack would be a mid-year guy.
And then, Bobby, we have people asking about Holden Stays. I know you mentioned him late last week. Can you give everybody the latest there?
Unless something has changed, I think he's sticking with Tennessee. Unless something's changed, I think he's sticking with Tennessee. I have not heard anything that would tell me differently right now.
And then one other tight end question, guys. This one from Matthew. He says, does Juan Davis have a spot on this year's lineup?
If he sticks around and doesn't portal, absolutely. I mean, this was a guy that Texas, kind of fought for to return from the portal. He was on the field sparingly towards the end of games this past year as well. He provides a little bit of a different skill set than what you see with Gunnar Helm and, obviously Malik Agbo also in that room as well. So it'll be interesting. I know that the portal entry was something that was the top of his mind. If Texas goes out and adds another piece from the portal, that will be something that we'll have to keep a close eye on just to see where Juan Davis, ultimately ends up, whether it be on the 2024 roster or, back entering his name in the portal. So that'll be interesting. But I think Texas would prefer him to stay. They fought for him to come back out of the portal. They wanted him back on this roster. So as long as he's willing to be a Longhorn, he's got a spot.
And then the other hot topic, guys, is the defensive tackle position and the coach more specifically. And we'll start with this one from Tracy Jackson. He says, any update on the defensive line coach? I'm assuming no Ed O.
I can't tell you that there's been any further update there. Look, other than Freddie Roach, the defensive line coach at the University of Alabama, has been retained by Kalen DeBoer, the new head coach at Alabama. He retained the defensive line coach. It was thought that Roach might be an easy fit for the Longhorns, since not only does Steve Sarkisian, but also Kyle Flood and Jeff Banks have experience with Freddie Roach. But look, Texas Texas has their man. I don't know who it is. Rod Wright has been a name that's been mentioned to me. He's the assistant defensive line coach for the Houston Texans. They're still in the playoffs. Oscar Giles, the former Texas defensive line coach, also at Wyoming here recently, has been mentioned, as well as a host of others. I've mentioned Zarnell Fitch at Texas Tech. I've mentioned Ed Orgeron as a possibility. Others too, Ryan Nielsen of the Atlanta Falcons, Clint Hurt of the Seattle Seahawks is no longer there. There are several different guys right now that all possibilities in my book.
And then we've had a lot of people join, so we're getting a couple of repetitive questions. But Vivek says, have y'all recapped what we can expect on Jabbar Muhammad's recruitment? No, we haven't, Vivek. Is he coming in for a visit? This would be a huge pickup.
As of yesterday afternoon, he's expected to visit Texas this coming weekend. As of yesterday afternoon. Now, Oregon made a big play for him on Saturday morning. Texas then went in Saturday afternoon, Terry Joseph. Muhammad is going to take his time. He doesn't have to make an immediate decision. He's going to be a grad transfer, it looks like. He is going to take his time. He's visiting Texas this coming weekend as of right now. Other teams are going to try to get involved, but it sounds like to me, from talking to those close to the situation, Texas and Oregon are the final two.
Okay, guys. Well, we talked about Silas from Oregon State a minute ago. Peter wants to know, what kind of role could we expect from him if he commits? Would it be a Keelan Robinson type of role?
That's kind of something I've juggled, because you've seen what Texas has added in the portal right now with Matthew Golden and clearly Isaiah Bond. The receivers that they can be, stretching the field vertically, down the field threats. They're not necessarily what you would consider one of those gadget wide receivers like what we saw with Keelan Robinson at times during his tenure on the 40 acres. I wouldn't necessarily consider Silas Bolden to be a gadget guy either. But in his fit in this offense, I'm not sure which of these wide receivers you're taking off the field, because I have very high hopes for Jonte Cook, as I know the staff does as well. Obviously, Golden, Bond, Ryan Wingo figures to be in the conversation. Bolden, a little bit different. Only about 5'8", $175. He's a speedster. He can change directions very well. Great return man as well. If he joins the Texas team, he will be in the return man conversation. I've been kind of juggling where he fits in the offense as a true wide receiver. Though Bobby has pointed out in the past, he did have more receptions than the two of Golden and Bond combined a year ago. So that's something to keep an eye on as well. It is just a big-time experienced wide receiver with good production that will be added to this room should he join anyways. You can never have too many of them. So at the same time, it's a good problem to have if he joins the wide receiver room, if you're Steve Sarkisian, to figure out the pieces once all of them are on campus.
This is interesting because the comparison to Keelan Robinson is there, but Keelan's actually much bigger, like thicker than Silas Bolden. Bolden is like 175. Keelan is more of a running back. Keelan doesn't have wide receiver hands. This guy has wide receiver hands. That's a little bit different, I would say. And I think Keelan has more acceleration. This guy has more juke to him. If you're trying to create a visual for yourself of what you're actually getting, my opinion, Blake and CJ, and everybody here is, I think that Steve Sarkisian just wants speed everywhere. That's what it looks like he's morphing to right now. Frankly, Jaden Blue fits that, right? Steve, I think Sark is going to start trying to, instead of being a more prototypical pro-style offense, I think we're going to see him try to go a little bit more towards the Miami Dolphins. Throw to space, let him run. And I could be wrong about that, but that's Isaiah Bond is that way. Matthew Golden is that way. Silas Bolden is that way. Jonte Cook is that way. Maybe Ryan Wingo's that way too. I mean, throw to space and let them roll. I think that's going to be something that's interesting. I think we could see a lot of bit different offense with Quinn Ewers in his third year as starter too.
Yeah. And we're going to stay on wide receivers, guys. We got a super chat here from JAR. Thank you, Jay. And he says, what's the projected depth chart at receiver now? And do you suspect anyone to transfer out with these new additions?
Boy, I wish I knew right now, because I literally went down and did the depth chart across the board, and the most messed up one I had anywhere was the wide receiver room. So if that gives y'all any kind of understanding of where we're at, I think that it's like CJ said the first part. I think these guys are going to be interchangeable a little bit. I think we're going to see a lot of trips. I think in bunch sets. Could be wrong, but that's my thinking as of right now. I feel like Cook, Bond, and Golden are your starters out of the gate. I feel really strongly about Ryan Wingo as a newcomer. If he's healthy, he just showed a little something that I think is rare. And he's also going to be the biggest one there, other than Parker Livingstone, I believe. And so you might have him out there. And then I don't know where, Silas Bolden may fit in there somewhere too. We could be looking at more 11 personnel as opposed to 12 personnel, or even 10. Yeah, we just don't know. You got to remember the great thing about, Sark with these pieces to the puzzle, like if they could go 21 look with Jaden Blue in the backfield and end up 11 personnel. They literally could, because he's got that kind of speed. I just feel like you got to find out what the mix is. The piece that Rod always talks about, and then I agree with him 100%. Who are the people within the circle of trust at the receiver position? You agree with that, CJ? Because it's not necessarily about position. They're trying to make it positionless, I think, at receiver. But it's who do they trust to put on the field when the time comes? Yeah,
absolutely. I think the circle of trust is what we keep referring to, but it's going to be a bunch of guys in that kind of rotation that see the field that we've mentioned, the Bonds, the Goldens, the Cooks. DeAndre Moore could figure in there as well. Ryan Wingo, we talk about being really the only true big body aside from Parker Livingstone as well. So that'll be interesting to watch. I think on the positionless aspect of things, this is kind of what Steve Sarkisian prefers at the wide receiver position. Guys where you don't necessarily know what tendencies are coming with them being on the field. We look back at 2019 Alabama when Sarkisian was there. The wide receivers, they were playing tic-tac-toe, rock, paper, scissors on the sideline to see who would get the certain position route as they were, exiting a timeout. They knew that a play was coming in at times. They knew that it was a high tendency that a deep ball would be thrown, a high probability that a touchdown would be caught. Sitting on the sideline, they know the routes. They obviously would sit back and play rock, paper, scissors on the sideline with one another to see who would get that money route, as they called it. And so I think that is kind of the transition that we're starting to see with Texas at the wide receiver spot. It's going to be an interchangeable mix with the speed and separation ability at the wide receiver position, something that Texas had with Xavier Worthy, but not necessarily an abundance of last year and the year prior in that wide receiver room. So that's the move that we're starting to see a little bit. And the addition of Silas Bolden, should he join the Texas roster as well, will only continue that trend of guys that can separate with their speed and quickness in space and throw it to space, as you kept mentioning, Bobby. Let the guys cook, no pun intended, with the ball in their hand right afterward.
Yeah, I think that's the big deal. That's going to be the difference because they had to throw to spots a lot this year. That's not a negative. JT Sanders is going to be an NFL player. Adonai Mitchell's an NFL player. Jordan Whittington likely an NFL player. What I'm talking about is a different style of offense, one that looks a little bit more like what, frankly, the Dolphins run with Jalen Waddle, Devin A-Chain, and Tyreek Hill.
Interesting, real quick, Bobby, that mention on Jatavian Sanders thrown to spots. That was a lot of where we saw Texas utilize the mismatch. Jatavian Sanders over the middle with tight ends. It wasn't always the case with Xavier Worthy and A.D. Mitchell. I think that's where Sarkisian wants to continue pushing the envelope with his wide receivers, is to continue to use his wide receivers over the middle, creating space, whereas it wasn't necessarily always a speed mismatch with who he deployed at the wide receiver position.
Well, guys, we're going to continue on with wide receiver talk. AJJ Sports says, does targeting all of these portal wide receivers show that Sark thinks the young guys aren't ready yet?
I think it's part of it. I mean, and he's probably right. Look, I mean, and I don't mean this to be negative towards Ryan Niblett, DeAndre Moore, or even Jonte Cook. I mean, there is no excuse in this day and age for a major college football team to be inexperienced. I mean, that's not an excuse anymore. With the NCAA transfer portal, if you're inexperienced somewhere, go get some portal guys. Texas lost 80% of its catches this year. 80%. Okay. If you bring in, first of all, Golden had 38 or 39 catches. Bond had 48. Bolden had 54. All of a sudden, you're back up to 40 or 50% of your total. It's a big difference. Jonte Cook is the returning leading receiver at 8 catches. Now, Gunnar Helm had 14, and Cedric Baxter, I think, had 24. But my point being, there is absolutely no reason. Does it say that some of these young guys may not be completely ready for prime time? Absolutely. Absolutely. But we've been saying that from the get-go, whether it's defensive line, offensive line. You can recruit as many 5-star offensive linemen you want. There's been one Kelvin Banks, and Texas has had 2 or 3 guys that are ready, that played that way. And so my point being, you can't expect every 5-star to come in and be ready to go right out of the gate, no matter how good they are.
Well, Bobby, you mentioned the Dolphins a second ago, and Antonio says, do you think that Sark sees Ewers as more of a Tua-style quarterback?
I see Tua more as a technician. Maybe I'm wrong. He tries to use his eyes to look people off a lot. Quinn has not done that as much. And I think Quinn is a more natural thrower of the football than Tua. Tua kind of forces it sometimes. But that being said, Tua is a top 10, 15 quarterback in the NFL, won a national championship. There are things that he does that are better than Quinn. I think he gets to his second and third receivers much better. Even he did that even better at a younger age than Quinn does now. So I think they're different. I think that Quinn has all the ability you want. He just has to keep improving. That's the bottom line. Keep taping it. Everything doesn't have to be overnight. Step by step by step. He took big steps from year 1 to year 2. Anybody that didn't see that, they're blind. I think he has a chance to keep making those positive steps. I thought he did actually late in the year. He got to his second and third receiver much quicker later in the year than he did it early. Against Oklahoma State, he did it almost out. It looked like he had really turned the corner against Oklahoma State, guys. So, we'll see. I feel good about Quinn. He's just got to keep moving, got to keep getting better.
Yep. Let's talk about running backs now. Matthew says, who is our number 2 back? Do we think Blue can run between the tackles? He personally believes so.
Yeah, I believe Blue can. I don't think he's a guy that will do it 20 times a game. I don't think size permitting, he's necessarily that guy that will, certainly run over guys. But the speed is there. The speed is a strength enough, and we've seen it time and time again with the long, explosive runs that he brings to the table. I like the idea of a Baxter Blue rotation, that 1-2 punch right there for the Texas running back group. If C.J. Baxter is able to come back in 2024 with, as we've talked about, a fresh coat of armor in terms of getting his body, fully fit for a full, kind of slate of running the football, I think the Texas running back room is going to put up some pretty big numbers next year as a result of this offensive line returning. It's very encouraging, obviously, when you start talking about the rearranging of the offensive line that has been kind of toyed around with, kind of theorized with going into spring football with Nato Umeozulu trying to get some cracks at left guard, Hayden Connor, Cam Williams moving out to right tackle. That battle there, it's intriguing to me. Baxter and Blue, I love the 1-2 punch with the two of them, and I think Blue has shown time and time again, if you give him the opportunities, he's going to be able to make, big time plays at the running back spot. He's just got to make sure he holds on to the football.
And then Casey says, if you have Bond, Golden, Jonte / Wingo, Blue all on the field, that will legit be the fastest skill position speed Texas has ever had. What's y'all's thoughts on that?
It's in the conversation.
There's not a slow guy in that group.
Yeah, that's a fun group.
Yeah, that entire thing may be sub 4.5. May all be low 4.4 actually. Put that back up if you don't mind, Blake.
Hang on, Bobby. I got to find it now. You put me on the spot. I think I accidentally unstarted. So give me just a second here.
I mean, Golden's low 4.4s, right? Bond's low 4.4s, high 4.3s.
Yep.
Cook's probably low to mid 4.4s. You think? Blue, low 4.4s.
Yeah.
That's not right to you? That's Wingo's a state champ in the 100-meter.
Yeah. Funny enough, Jonte might be
the slowest of that group.
I didn't want to say it, but maybe. And that's crazy because I think he brings some pretty good burst and change of direction ability. I mean, if that's what you're considering to be the slowest of the group, that comment is spot on.
Yeah.
That's a
Silas Bolden would be in that 4.4 range too.
That's a tremendous amount of speed right there.
And then Casey had one other comment I want to bring up, guys. The yards after catch with these players is going to be insane. I love Jordan Whittington and his leadership / blocking, but we are going to have something on offense we didn't have last year.
I agree. That's what we were just talking about, right? I mean, we think that they're going to push some buttons that are a little bit different next year. And I think they should be able to, Sark inherited a certain type of personnel that he had to play to. Let's not forget that. I mean, Jordan Whittington's a good player. He's not, this quick twitch guy, right? He had Casey Kane instead of Adonai Mitchell his first year. So there are elements here that we gotta be accurate about. I'm interested to see what the maturation is of this offense and where he goes from here, because it looks to me, based on who he's recruiting, he's trying to change it up a little bit.
Yeah.
It's not Let me get a big guy outside. Let me have my blocking guy inside in the slot, and let me have the guy that can hit the go routes with Xavier Worthy on the outside. It looks like he's trying to remake it a little bit right now.
Okay, we have a super chat from Blake, and Blake says his Quinn Ewers NFL comparison is Jared Goff.
And Goff had a pretty good game last night. I think it was 21 to 26. Not too bad. I don't know. I haven't really thought about an NFL comparison for Quinn Ewers before. Quinn's a unique quarterback in the sense that, the throwing ability, I think, is still, while good and a specialty of his, I think it's still a work in progress. You talk about the lack of a fastball. I don't know if there's a quarterback in the NFL that doesn't have that in his back pocket. Maybe Goff is the right comparison. I'll have to do a deeper look, but I mean, Goff just went 12-5 this year. He led a pretty good offense. I don't think that's necessarily a knock, as if I don't think that was the intention, but I'd like to see Quinn, add that fastball, add that, kind of zip to his passes like you've been talking about, Bobby. That will be the next step for him, but it's an exciting problem to have when your third-year starting quarterback is now having all these pieces to throw the ball to. We'll get to see an improved Quinn Ewers in 2024.
I like it. I don't know. I don't know if I agree with that comparison, although there are some similarities. I'm trying to think of who Quinn reminds me of. Let me come back to that. Let's come back to that because I struggle a little bit with that. Not Stafford.
He's not Stafford. No.
Stafford has a real fastball.
Yeah.
Hold on.
Well, we've talked about just about every position on the offense, but offensive line. So let's talk about that. Zane Petty says, "Who are y'all starting 5 offensive linemen next year, and at what position?"
I'll go first. If I'm really putting it out there, this is who I think starts next year. Left tackle, Kelvin Banks. Left guard, Cole Hudson. Center, Jake Majors. Right guard, DJ Campbell. Right tackle, Cam Williams. I think Hayden Conner is going to be put out to right tackle to compete against Cam Williams. I think he'll then come back and really try to compete against Cole Hudson and Neto. I think Neto or Cole Hudson is going to get that left guard job. I think in the SEC, Hayden Conner is a tackle, not a guard. And that's going to be ultimately, even with all that experience he has, he's a really good player. I think he's got to either get stronger at the point of attack or go play tackle.
Yeah. I like that starting 5. I love the idea of Cam Williams, starting at right tackle. I think what he was able to show against Kansas State when he was able to hold his water and not commit false starts, he had a tremendous day against a pretty good front 7 at Kansas State. My question mark on that right side is going to be the communication and obviously chemistry of DJ Campbell and Cam Williams together. It's going to be a spot where I think opposing teams are going to look to, kind of take advantage of the communication and stunt pickups from the two of them. It's going to have to take a big spring ball of chemistry and standing next to one another and the line of scrimmage and pass protection and everything along the lines of that for me to feel comfortable with that. Because we saw it, Washington picked on DJ Campbell a little bit. That was kind of the spot Texas was most vulnerable at in pass protection. So another year, you obviously expect that to be better in terms of, just being able to pick up stunts, twists, everything along the lines of that from the defensive side of the ball. But I love, that concept in my mind of seeing big old Cam Williams out at right tackle. That's very exciting to me.
Hey, y'all, while we're on the subject of offensive linemen here, I want to bring this up. PFF College put this out over the weekend. Texas center Jake Majors last season, 504 pass block snaps, 0 sacks allowed, 1 quarterback hit allowed. And Majors was taking quite a bit of crap before the season started from fans, especially. I mean, we saw it, right here in the chat and things like that. But what's y'all's take on his play this past season and, more importantly, his improvement?
He certainly took a step up from 2022. I thought he had a pretty good year, pretty strong year this year. The Texas offensive line in general took a big leap forward, something that I think everybody was excited about and anticipated with how many guys returned from 2022. So that should also continue into this year. The return and the cohesiveness is something that Texas is familiar with. There's an expectation there. But for Jake Majors in the middle, we talked about Texas's defensive line this past year getting pressure through the middle and causing disruption as a result. If your quarterback is getting pressure straight on, it changes the entire read settings. It changes everything from the quarterback rather than coming off the edge where you can slide up, slide through, get to the the line of scrimmage and take off. If it's coming straight up the middle, things become a whole lot more foggy. The side of vision is deterred immediately. Jake Majors, I thought, had a good year. I was actually kind of surprised that no quarterback sacks and only one quarterback hit out of that many snap count. I mean, that was credit to him. Good year.
I think he was the glue for that offensive line this year from the start. Underrated. I wrote a response on that tweet, by the way, Blake. I felt like he was underrated the whole year. Yes, he had some snap infractions, but didn't have any snap problems. We saw some things happen in that regard that were really bad throughout college football. But I think he's the glue. I think him coming back next year puts Texas in a advantageous situation on the offensive line next year. There's got to worry about the calls on the offensive line next year going in the SEC. You got to worry about adding it's just a guy like that coming back with that much experience at the center of he's touching the football every time you're on the game, on the field. And I just think he's a good, solid player, has done his best for the University of Texas. And now he's going to go get a business degree as a grad student. So I'm happy for him.
Okay, guys, we got a couple of other questions here regarding Majors and the offensive line that we'll get to. Then we'll switch gears. But Emmanuel Villafranco says, do you think eventually he gets drafted or maybe undrafted free agent and makes a roster?
I think he can make a roster. I don't know about getting drafted.
Yep. I think with Majors, there's a question mark about the arm length and obviously the height and weight. But the play itself, pretty good this past year. Like you said, Bobby, I mean, if he's able to replicate another season of 500-plus pass pro snaps and not have a single, sack or quarterback hit added to that tally, I mean, that tape is going to go a long way.
Okay, guys, we got a super chat from Kabir Hussein. Thank you, Kabir. And he says, all the mid-year transfers, considering UT, have to do so by today, right? Since the semester starts tomorrow. Bobby, you're shaking your head. No, I'll let you take it.
No, they don't. Here's what has to happen, Kabir. And this is a common misperception. They actually don't have to enroll until the last day to add drop classes. So that's, 2 weeks from now, CJ?
Yeah,
roughly. Isaiah Nayor did that, by the way. He didn't enroll until late January at Texas. So there's a precedent for this. The idea that you have to do it right now is inaccurate. The other issue, and this is it right here. Donald Skipper asking the same question. That's how they do it. They just have to enroll by the last day to add drop classes.
Okay, guys, with the departure of Bo Davis, there's been speculation about Texas' current defensive tackle commit signees, however you want to say it, possibly asking to get out of that. And Danny Moss says, did DeAndre Robinson submit a requested letter of release to Texas? What's the latest there along with the other defensive tackle signees?
Yeah, I mean, Alex January showed up yesterday. So he's on campus, getting ready to go to class tomorrow. DeAndre Robinson did not. It's my understanding he has asked for a release from his letter of intent. It's my understanding that Texas is likely to give him that if they haven't already. So I think, by and large, it looks like DeAndre Robinson almost assuredly no longer a member of this class.
And then Matthew says, is there any update on Aaron Bryant?
I mean, we're just waiting for spring football, winter workouts to get going. I mean, Aaron Bryant's a guy that the staff has high hopes for. He's obviously going to be in a position to take a larger role in the Texas defense next year. Him and Jere Bledsoe, I know that the staff is high on them. There was, about 20 snaps a game or 15, 20 snaps a game for Aaron Bryant when you kind of consider the full amount from this past season. If he's able to take that next step and get into that 30 snap count range, I think for Texas, you have to feel good about, what he would bring to this defensive line. But it's going to start in the offseason and obviously spring football to ensure that he is able to, be ready for extended snap counts, because Texas is going to need those bodies in the defensive line for 2024.
You're muted, Bobby.
Right now, you got to say that he's in the rotation. Unless they add significant bodies on the interior, Aaron Bryant's in the rotation next year, because Vernon Broughton and Alfred Collins are your top two, neither of whom, by the way, are true nose tackles by any stretch. Aaron Bryant is more of that over the nose. Sadir Mitchell's more of that over the nose. Alex January's more over the nose. I think that we're looking at, especially if Texas does not get anybody in the portal, I think you may be looking at Aaron Bryant running 35 to 40 snaps a game as opposed to 20 to 30, CJ.
Okay, guys. Jason Spire says, it looks like we're at 86 right now, with us still in pursuit of a few more portal targets. How do we logistically manage these numbers?
I think they realize there's going to be more attrition at the end of in April. I think April 15th to April 30th is the second portal window. I think that there will be more attrition during that time frame. And that's only natural, because a lot of them are going to see, well, I'm not going to play now. Maybe it's a DB that got passed by a freshman. There's 5 freshmen coming in. If a DB gets passed by one of those guys, they may be gone, right? Same with a receiver, same with a offensive lineman. You just never know.
And then we're going to stay on the portal talk for just a second here, as I just lost the question. Oh, here we go. And then King Me says, are we finished recruiting ice cream in the portal and only going after the sprinkles now?
Dude,
I think one of the big ingredients to the ice cream is the milk, and you got to have the big boys up front that can carry the load there. So, I mean, there's got to be an addition on the defensive line for me before you – I mean, the sprinkles that you want to talk about with Bond and Golden, I mean, tremendous. We're talking about the pink icing sprinkles on the donut, if you will. But right now, you got to continue to add the big ingredients up front, and I think a portal piece on that defensive line is something that the Texas staff would, very much be excited about adding to this group. Like you've talked about, Bobby, a true nose is something that Texas is lacking right now with experience. So that's got to be that last ingredient before you can really start going to the window and start picking out the nuts and the sprinkles and everything that go, the whipped cream and the cherry, everything on top of that.
All right, guys. Well, we've had a lot of people join since we first started this. So let's go back. Let's rehash the news of the day that we initially started with. We're going to start with Isaiah Bond, of course, the Alabama wide receiver who committed to Texas over the weekend. How big of a deal is that for the Longhorns offense next season?
I think he's an immediate impact player. I mean, I think that Trey Moore is going to have a place at Texas. I think Matthew Golden's going to have a place at Texas. I think, Andrew Makuba is going to have a place at Texas. This is a guy that could be a first-round pick. That's the difference. I mean, you agree with that, CJ?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, 670 yards receiving this year. Was all over the field in terms of where he aligned for Alabama as well. So it's not like he is a one-trick pony in terms of his speed. 58% of his snaps came from the slot as well. So he's a guy that you can move around and use his speed to create mismatches with safeties, with linebackers. If you go man coverage, you better be able to have help over the top, because he's a guy that can break the roof off of any defense. Similar to what we talked about with Matthew Golden and obviously Jonte Cook, their ability to be well-rounded at the wide receiver position gives Texas 3 true threats that you know about right now that can walk onto the field and create separation from defenders and secondary members. So very encouraging, and the three of them together is exciting as we move towards Sarkisian really prioritizing speed and separation as opposed to true possession, big body. Let me get the first down and go down kind of guys.
And then the other big news, of course, this weekend was the addition of Dwayne Akina, the former Texas defensive back coach, who's now moving into an off-the-field analyst role. Bobby, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Dwayne Akina spent 13 years in Austin prior to this one. Prior to his return, it actually came in on, I think he was in on Saturday morning. But long story short, he tutored 6 NFL first-round picks while at Texas. Got to know Johnny Nansen while an off-the-field assistant this past year at Arizona. Then comes to Austin with Johnny Nansen basically a week later. Michael Huff, those guys, all friends with Dwayne Akina to this day. He is one of those coaches that former players keep in touch with. And I think we've all had, I have guys, I have a high school coach that I still keep in touch with. I have some guys from college that I still keep in touch with that were mentors to me. That's what Dwayne Akina is to a lot of those older players. He will bring that to the culture of the University of Texas. I have no doubt. I just think it's a big, big win for UT.
Well, before we move on, Bobby, I'm going to let you tell everybody out there about John Donovan and Longhorn Wealth Management Group.
Yeah, absolutely. John's a proud UT grad and shares his Longhorn passion with his wife and 6 siblings, all UT grads. Imagine what that would cost these days. John is a certified financial planner who has spent more than 30 years providing investment, insurance, retirement, and estate planning services and solutions to his clients. John has served 14 years as a Dallas, Texas Exes board member, and it's his love for UT that inspired him to dedicate his firm to serving his fellow UT alums and all UT employees for a free 90-minute consultation. That's right, it's free to explore how Longhorn Wealth can serve you and your loved ones. Please give John and his team a call at 972-707-4900 or visit longhornwealth.net. That's John Donovan, 972-707 Longhorn, 4900 longhornwealth.net.
Okay, guys, we're going to go back to Akina and talk a little more defense here. We've had a few questions, and I know this is going to be kind of hard to answer, but we'll get y'all's perspective on it. Archmania says, how do y'all think Akina sees this defensive back roster in comparison to some of his greats while at Texas previously? I know that's going to be hard to do, but how do y'all see it comparing some of those players?
Well, that's tough. I wasn't very old when those guys were still running around, so I'm not sure I can add a whole lot to that. I just hope that the increased athleticism that we're seeing, walk into the secondary room right now resembles what was on campus at the time. I hope that's the case. I know that's a tall task with how many, first round and NFL caliber guys were, parading through those hallways back in the day. So, Bobby, I hope you got a better answer than I do, because I was just looking at the time in which these guys were here. I was probably walking into middle school hoping to see a burrito day at the cafeteria line more so than what was actually going on in the Texas secondary room at the time.
Burrito day.
That's every Tuesday and Thursday.
I was all about Thursdays for me going in. I'm actually looking back at a couple of recruiting classes right now. That's what I'm doing on my phone. And here's a recruiting class for you. The 2003 Texas recruiting class: Michael Griffin, Terrell Brown. Let's see, Brandon Foster had a cup of coffee in the league. Those guys, the 2002 recruiting class, back to back, just great recruiting classes for Texas. Among the first for Dwayne Akina, by the way. He didn't get to Texas, I think, until 2000. But in that recruiting class for Texas, you had a guy named Dorian McCullough, who was one of the best DBs in the country. He played as a true freshman. Aaron Ross was in that class. Mike Huff was in that class. You look up and down it, and those two back-to-back classes were outstanding. I think Texas has a chance to have that same type of role right now. This past recruiting class is as good a DB recruiting class as Texas has had in a long time. Back to when he was running around back when Dwayne Akina was coaching the secondary. So how would he perceive it? I don't know. I mean, the one thing that Rod talks about that I agree with, Dwayne Akina likes cover guys as much as anything. Like, the way to defend the spread, in his opinion, is to have 5 defensive guys that can cover, not just a fill the alley safety like a Jalen Catalon, right? But a guy that actually can cover one-on-one. And so I feel like Texas got the Wardell Max, the Xavier Filsames, the Kobe Blacks that can do that sort of thing. They're versatile, can run, can pick that kind of stuff up.
Bobby, I know you said at the beginning of the broadcast when we first talked about Akina that you don't know what exactly his role is going to be at Texas. But in your opinion, how important and how impactful is it to have a guy, such a great defensive back coach, giving his input into a program like this?
Well, I think it's important too that he's not going to overrule Terry Joseph or Blake Gideon. Let's be clear about that. But look, I mean, he just saw Oklahoma in the bowl game, right? He watched Arizona played Oklahoma in the bowl game. Maybe he caught up on some things there that could help Texas in the secondary, and they handled Jackson Arnold pretty darn well, right? And so maybe they've got a feel for what they want to do on offense, and things like that can help. You're not looking for them to rule the roost as an off-field analyst. Your point was correct, Blake. You're looking for minor points, right? Improve us 1%, improve us 2%, not improve us 50% from those guys. If you're looking for improve us 50%, then you probably need to fire your existing coaches. That you know what I mean? And so they're looking for little points that they can improve on. And I do think that Dwayne Akina can help them do that.
For sure. Okay, a hot topic in the chat right now, and I mean very hot because a lot of people are giving their input in it. Donald Skipper says, could Livingstone beef up to be a tight end? And people are real split on this in the chat, but I want to get y'all's input on that.
I don't think so. I don't think this is a guy that you want to beef up to be a tight end. Parker Livingstone and what he brings to the table is the combination of size and speed. He is shifty enough. He can change directions very well. This is a complete wide receiver that just has a lot of height to him. There was a reason why he was returning punts and kicks for Lovejoy this year before he got hurt. He was running the 200 and 400 in track as well. The speed and the size make him, the wide receiver that he is. This is a very talented wide receiver. I'm as high as him, as anybody that you'll find in the recruiting market. I had him as a top 5 wide receiver in the state coming into the year, and I thought the early games that we saw from him, he was kind of creeping into the top 3 conversation. He was that impactful. He was a special prospect, and I'm upset that we didn't really get to see a full year of senior Parker Livingstone as a result of his injury, because this would not be a conversation topic right now if you were able to see the highlights that he produces on a week-to-week basis. The hands are tremendous. The height, the separation ability is tremendous for a guy that big. This is a guy I have high hopes for during his time at Texas. I'm not sure how quickly he'll see the field, but he's a playmaker. He can get on the field and be a difference. So I think he's a wide receiver through and through.
Okay, let's go back to the other side of the football. Matthew asks, where does Jere Bledsoe play next year? Is it at the 3 tech?
Yeah, it's a good question.
How much weight does he add?
Yeah, that's really the question. He doesn't even look like he's 280 right now.
Yep.
But he needs to get to 295 to play on the interior in the SEC.
Absolutely.
So I can see him. They may go a big 3 at times and play him at a 5 technique, kind of like they did with Alfred Collins at times. But I just don't know. Look, I think he's going to have to play 3 technique. There's no question about that. Whether or not he can do it at 290, 295 as opposed to 280, 275 is a different story. This is a big year for him and a couple of other players for Texas. As CJ mentioned earlier, adding that armor. Well, sometimes offensive linemen, it takes them 2 years to get that armor. Sometimes defensive linemen 2 years, or a running back 1 year. When you're trying to build up an uber athletic interior defensive linemen like Jure Bledsoe, sometimes it takes time to get the right amount of weight on them. And so this offseason is huge for him. I really do believe that. I think he could be a tremendous player for Texas if he can gain the weight. Right now, he's a little bit of a tweener, to your point.
Well, let's talk about, we talked about the interior of the line. Blackwin wants to talk about the edges. He says everyone talks about the lack of depth on the interior, but I think our edges are going to be great next year. What do y'all think?
They should certainly be improved. They should be able to get home a little bit more than what we've seen. One of my favorite points that Rod always brings up is, pass rushers know how to pass rush. That's kind of an instinctual thing. If you've ever, played the position, you know how to beat the man in front of you. That's what Trey Moore does. That's what Colin Simmons does at the high school level. These are a lot of sacks that Trey Moore is bringing into the table. 22 sacks over the last 2 seasons, 14.5 this past year, 17.5 tackles for loss. It's a guy that's very active in the backfield. That's what Texas needs. They need the guys on the edges combined with Ethan Burke, Barron Sorrell, Justice Finkley, and Jamon Tapp to get to the quarterback and bring them down behind the line of scrimmage. So I'm excited for it. This should be, I don't want to call it a strength, but this should certainly be a step up from what we saw in 2023 next season at the edge position as a result of these guys joining the rotation. So it should certainly be in the conversation for strength, and it certainly should make up for, at least in the passing game, what Texas lost with Byron Murphy and Tavondre Sweat.
Okay, David says, Steve Sarkisian always talks about how great the culture is. But when you bring players to start over your current starters, does that affect your culture and your locker room?
Who did he do that with?
Well, the wide receiver position.
But nobody's starting. Who's the returning starters?
Fair.
I mean, Makuba, who's the returning starter at safety? Trey Moore, is he going to actually start over Burke or Sorrell? We'll see. I mean, I think that, Casey Kane wasn't a returning starter, that Adonai Mitchell came and took the job over, right? I don't think that's the case. I don't think that's people thinking, oh, well, I'm next in line isn't the same as I am a current starter. And that's and I will say this: if you're not good enough, you're not good enough. Steve Sarkisian's job is to create the culture and decide what is and what isn't good enough, right? So I don't have this concern like that, because football, it is a business at some level. Yes, it's college football, so it's kind of masked in this scenario. But the reality of it is a fifth-year guy or a fourth-year guy that's got 3 years starting experience is better served to start at the University of Texas than a freshman that has been busting assignments all week in practice or still can't lift 185 20 times or 15 times. That's just the way it is.
Lots of people weighing in on this. Ron S. says being able to navigate playing issues with transfers is one of Sark's strengths. I agree.
Yeah, y'all agree with that? You agree with that too, Blake? Because I think that's like he's got a way about him that I think everybody kind of looks at and just kind of nods. It's not. Is it absolutely perfect? No, nothing's perfect. But he sure did a pretty masterful job over the last 2 years, in my opinion.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Okay, guys, going on to next season here. Bobby TD Brown says, hook 'em from snowy Hurst, Texas. What will the Texas offense average next year? Do you think it'll be 40 points? Oh, I forgot. It's the SEC next year. But in all seriousness, what do y'all think would be successful? Or what number would you point to and say, okay, that's been a successful offense this season?
What did Alabama average in the SEC this year?
Let me look.
I don't think it's going to be as potent as Georgia's was. Do you think that, CJ? Like CJ, I thought I think Georgia probably had the best offense in the SEC. Missouri maybe the second best. No, LSU. LSU and Georgia probably had the two best.
There were 5 teams in the country this year that averaged 40 points. LSU, Georgia, Oregon, Oklahoma, and I just lost the last one. Sorry, USC. So look at the quarterbacks and, kind of style and play in which those guys, brought to the table. You have a Heisman winner, Caleb Williams, a Heisman winner, Jaden Daniels. You got a 6-year guy in Dylan Gabriel who, was in the same system his entire career. They like to go fast. They like to throw the ball vertically. They also put up 70 points on a high school team week 2. So take that for what it is. Georgia is in that conversation of having just more talent than everybody else around them as well. And then, Oregon, a well-rounded machine. I thought, with a 5th-year quarterback, Bo Nix, 6-year quarterback, whatever he was, and a great offensive line and running game. How does Texas take that next step? Well, they're going to have a 3rd-year starter, Quinn Ewers, in the position of quarterback. They're going to have a dominant offensive line, which, as a result, they should have a good running game as well. We'll see just how that goes and how that translates in the SEC. We've talked about the speed and new additions to the wide receiving room that can take the top off of defenses as well. I don't think 40 points is a guarantee. Only 4 teams did it, or 5 teams did it this past season. But when you kind of take, into consideration how this roster is shaping up offensively, it certainly is worth the conversation to say Texas could take that jump with a 3rd-year starting quarterback in the system to be in that conversation for one of the best offenses in the SEC and, as a result, in the entire country. So I think it's not too far out of the picture, but it's not, an easy thing to do. Texas will be going against, tougher defenses. They'll be going up against guys who can get after the quarterback more, efficiently than what we have seen. Texas averaged 35 points per game this year. They only had 1 game, I think, in which they didn't average or didn't score more than 30. If Texas is able to average, right in that 35 point per game, 40 range right there, you got to be excited about the win-loss category when it's all said and done at the end of the season.
Hey, Bobby, 33.9 points per game for Alabama on average.
And they won the SEC. You're not going to outscore as many people in the SEC as you would in the Big 12. That sounds antithetical because the whole idea is to outscore your opponents, therefore you win the game. What I meant by that is the games aren't going to be these shootouts, 41-40, 38-35. They're more in that 31-17, 35-21 type range typically. And so I think Texas averages 33 or 34 next year. That's a 9-10 win team in the SEC. That's my thought.
Well, while we're on the subject of SEC kind of versus Big 12 top questions here, Emmanuel Villafranco says, is the composition of an edge player different in the Big 12 than in the SEC?
That's a few years ago, that question absolutely would have been, yes. Texas has gone against some really good edge rushers in the Big 12 over the last, few years. Felix Anaduke-Uzuma, Tyree Wilson at Texas Tech, Booker out of Kansas right now. These are all guys who I would say were first-round caliber guys and were picked in the first round. So a few years ago, yes, I actually think Texas, having played in the Big 12 against the competition that they played on the edges, is going to suit them up nicely for the SEC move. The interiors where you're really going to see the dogs separate themselves from what we saw in the Big 12.
There will not be a team in the SEC that doesn't have an interior defensive lineman that plays in the pros, with perhaps the singular exception of Vanderbilt. That is where, if you look at any kind of roster density in the NFL, the majority of NFL defensive linemen interior come from the SEC, the Big Ten, and the ACC. That's the difference.
Okay, y'all. Next question here. I know we talked about wide receivers a lot today, but there's been a lot of wide receiver related questions. Champ Bailey says, who will play the AD Mitchell role? Do you think it will be Ryan Wingo?
Who's to say there is an AD Mitchell role this year?
That's what you and I. Yeah, that's where CJ and I have kind of come to the conclusion of who says there is defined roles this year. I mean, Sark didn't really have defined roles at Alabama. He moved them all. I think that's maybe what he wants. Get more speed on the field and figure it out.
And then Jesus asks, where do we go from here with the wide receiver position? I know we talked about Silas Bolden, but he's asking about Silas, of course, Williams, and then Jalen Hale, the Alabama receiver originally from East Texas.
It's a fun question to ponder. I think Ryan Williams is a take no matter what. He's a guy that, is in that conversation already to being one of the best, wide receivers in the entire country and the recruiting ranks, and that's after reclassifying to the 2024 level. So he's going to be in that conversation to have a spot on the team regardless of the numbers. Silas Bolden, obviously Texas took him in this past week for an official visit. He's been telling, several outlets Texas is, a very, intriguing school for me. I think he even mentioned Texas was a top school that he had visited. He had, obvious interest in Texas immediately upon entering his name in the portal. It'll be interesting. I think that one or two spots remain for those two. If Jalen Hale enters the portal, I think Texas is now at a real conversation of numbers wise, because you're already in the market for, a 2024 wide receiver edition, as well as Silas Bolden. Will they take both? I'm not really sure. But I mean, it's a fun problem to have with all these talented wide receivers. That's for sure.
I'm not so sure Jalen Hale's a take right now, is the reality. Doesn't mean that he shouldn't be. It's just the numbers issue that CJ is talking about. I mean, here's what's happening right now. Texas clearly is looking for elite players. They don't need to wait on they don't need to sit here and wait for a guy to become a great player. With the portal, you can just go out and get a great player, especially at wide receiver. We've seen that 2 years in a row. They went out and got Adonai Mitchell. They went out and got Isaiah Bond. You can go out and get a great player at receiver. You don't necessarily want to go out into the portal and incubate a wide receiver. Jalen Hale probably would take some incubating. Why not just wait to get someone as good or better than Jalen Hale when the time comes? It's different whenever you're trying to get them on your roster and kind of bring them along to create that culture. It's different whenever they're only a year into their roster spot as it is. The Alabama guy that I think that everybody needs to be aware of, and we need to close it up here pretty quick, Blake, because of everything going on, but is Amari Niblack, the tight end. We haven't talked about him this part of the hour. He is the tight end at Alabama that is officially in the portal. And I think that Texas is very, very interested there if they can get him on campus and get him interested in them. Okay. There is no doubt that that's where Texas goes next, in my opinion, at Alabama. That being said, there's also Ben Urisic, the tight end at Stanford, that I think Texas is also going to be interested in. So tight end's a position that Texas needs to address in the portal. They need to find a defensive lineman. Maybe that comes from Arizona. Now that Arizona or Washington, they both had guys, their coaches leave. Those guys could go in the portal. Maybe Johnny Nansen knows one of those guys. Maybe Dwayne Akina does. We'll see. They're not necessarily poaching from the same team now that the head coaches went elsewhere. So I feel like those are the things we need to be looking for as it relates to that position, or those things in the portal right now. Not so much worrying about Jalen Hale.
No. And then talking about Alabama portal players, FCJ says, if we pick up Kendrick Blackshire, what role would we project for him?
Back up to Anthony Hill. Back up to David Benda. He's a downhill linebacker. He's not, apparently, from talking to people, and this was his issue in high school too, a real thumper, but lacked awareness and coverage. He's gained weight and size at Alabama and strength, but he hasn't shown the proclivity to play in pass coverage. So he's a downhill linebacker right now, which is okay at one position in the SEC because you have to button up against the run.
Okay, guys, this will be the last question for today. And Matthew says, who do y'all think will be the teams with the biggest drop-offs this year? He personally thinks Michigan, Washington, and Florida State. By the way, Jim Harbaugh will be interviewing with the Chargers later today. So that's worth noting.
It's a good question. It's a really good question. I'm kind of intrigued to see what LSU does at quarterback. You know, how does that play continue? That defense was obviously not very good. They did, wipe house in the defensive side of the room. It can't be much worse than it was last year. I don't think that offense will sustain. I'm looking at teams around the SEC that will actually take that step up. I think Ole Miss is in that conversation. Missouri returns a lot of its offensive weapons, quarterback included. I think Kentucky is a sneaky good team as well to take that leap up. That's intriguing. Can I offer Oklahoma as a team that, could be one that maybe stays a little stagnant or goes down as a result of quarterback play? Young quarterbacks don't necessarily thrive right away in the SEC. That'll be one I'm a little intrigued about early in the season. But LSU, I guess, is that one team for me where I'm kind of looking like, they weren't great already last year. You lose a Heisman winning quarterback that masks a lot of your issues. It's not a real, abundance of talent on that defensive side of the ball already. We'll see.
At the elite level, I would think that Michigan will fall off some. How much? I don't know. I don't know their talent level. I just know they looked really, really good in the national championship game and looked good all year long. I would also add that Washington certainly is going to fall off. They had a 5th or 6th year quarterback. But the thing with Washington, they may take Arizona's quarterback and receiver. So, but I don't think they're going to have the miracle season they did this year. I think Alabama will fall off next year. The team that I think is going to be the odds-on favorite to win it all next year is Georgia. Georgia, and if the other one, can Ohio State get the quarterback position right? If they can, they've got a lot coming back.
So much.
They really do. Enough maybe that they can hide a quarterback at some level. But if they don't get another quarterback, they're not going to suffer Ryan Day losing again to Michigan next year. It doesn't work that way up north. And Keyshawn Judkins along with Travion Henderson, they may have the 2 best running backs in the country next year.
Yep, very true. All right, guys. Well, Bobby, before we get out of here, can you let folks know what to expect later today right here on Texas Football?
Yeah, absolutely. If we get any breaking news, we'll certainly be back with other news and notes for you. Also, our friend Rod Babers will be joining CJ Vogel for Talking Ball later this afternoon. And you know what? I want to add this before I get going. So people were asking about Tyanthony Smith and whether or not he made it to campus yesterday. The answer is yes, he did. So Tyanthony Smith officially going already on campus. I forgot to mention that. The only recruit that's not on campus that was expected is DeAndre Robinson out of Orlando Jones, the defensive lineman, we believe has asked for a release from his NLI from the University of Texas.
Okay, guys. Well, I think I've said it a million times since last week, but it's the truth. Now is the time to subscribe if you haven't already and ring that bell because there's been so much breaking news lately. That way you're notified anytime we go live, anytime we post a video for when that news breaks. You don't want to miss it. So be sure to do that. Hit that like button. We would appreciate that as well. And got to thank John Donovan and Longhorn Wealth Management Group for sponsoring today's show. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you for the super chats. As Bobby said, we'll be here later today with more content right here on Texas Football. And for Bobby Burton and CJ Vogel, I'm Blake Monroe, and we'll see you tomorrow morning.